Hello, I'm gonna make some white pine syrup today. I want to show you what I'm doing so you can make this at home. Pine is pretty much everywhere across North America. If you can find a pine tree, you can make some medicine out of it, and it's such a wonderful thing to have moving into the wintertime for respiratory infections. Helps to open the airways. It's very soothing as a stimulating expectorant, getting things moving when you've had some congestion and bogginess going on in there. So I'm just going to show you what I'm doing. This is some beautiful white pine needles that were gathered a few weeks ago, and they're fully dried. So you do want to dry your needles first. You can use any kind of pine, so depending on the region you're in. Bigger, longer needles will take longer to dry. It's just something to consider. Then, once they're dried, I'm going to grind them up. So I have a Vitamix here, which you can't see, my Vitamix. And here is my ground up pine needles. You can really smell the volatile oils once you grind up the needles. So these are dried needles that have just been run through the Vitamix, not until they're a powder, but just until they're kind of chopped up and more of the surface area is exposed in the plant matter. Okay, and then I'm gonna put some water in it and decoct it. So I'm gonna do that. We'll be right back. So here we are. We have our ground up pine needles in a stock pot full of water. I did a rough estimate on the scale, which I ended up with about 3 ounces of dried herb, which is roughly 100 grams. So yeah, 100 grams of plant material that was dried and ground up, and then just a ratio to give you an idea of how much water to how much plant. I ended up adding 4 liters or 4 quarts. So yeah, that's kind of a good ratio of about 100 grams of herb to about 4 liters of water. And I'm just gonna let this simmer and reduce. My plan is to let it reduce to about half the volume. So 4 quarts or 4 liters of water, we're gonna reduce it down to about 2 liters of water. And then we'll have a nice strong water concentrate. To make it into a syrup, we're just going to add, I'm gonna do a glycerin based syrup. So I'm gonna use glycerin and apple cider vinegar to preserve it and make it shelf stable. I'm choosing this method because it's shelf stable and I can keep it around for a long time. I do like to make honey-based syrups, and honey-based syrups are awesome. You could do the same thing where you reduce it down into a nice strong decoction. It's a tea that you've cooked for a while. And then simply add 1/3 the volume of honey to make it into a syrup. Problem is honey-based syrups tend to go moldy and they only last for about a month, then they have to be refrigerated. The other option is to make a sugar-based syrup, and sugar-based syrups are probably the most traditional and classic. So same thing, you'd reduce the volume of half to make your strong tea, and then you'd add like double the volume in grams in sugar. So it's a lot of sugar. The one problem there is it's not safe for somebody who has blood sugar problems or is diabetic or pre-diabetic or looking to moderate how much carbohydrate or sugar content they're putting in their system. So that's the reason I'm choosing the glycerin base, is because I get the shelf stability that I would get with a sugar-based syrup, and it's not high glycemic. So that's my reasoning. I'll explain all that part when we get to it. For now, just know I ground up a bunch of herbs. I put it in a bunch of water, and I'm just gonna let this simmer and cook for a good long while. I'll show you what happens next. Okay, here we are. I've finished my pine needle decoction. Now I'm gonna finish it into a syrup. So you can see I've strained it already. It's lovely golden amber color in there, and it smells really good. It did take a long time. I didn't want to get to a boil because the rapid boil would release all of the volatile oils, all that lovely pine fragrance and those delicate aromatics that we want to retain in our water extraction. So it took me a long time to reduce this. I did simmer it, not on simmer, I actually had it just below a simmer. You could see the steam kind of rising, but it wasn't agitation with bubbles. So anyway, just saying, low heat, long time to reduce it, and that helped retain a lot of the fragrance. So anyway, tea's part, that's done. That took all day. Now we're going to make it into a syrup by adding some glycerin and some apple cider vinegar. So like I said earlier, this is one method of making a syrup. There's 3 primary methods of syrup making that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there's more out there. Someone please tell me if you know. But the most traditional one is a sugar-based syrup. Same method, you make a tea, and then you'd add double the volume in grams of sugar. I mean, like, that's a lot of sugar. You basically let it dissolve as much sugar as it'll possibly take before it falls out of solution, and that's what preserves it. The other method is to make a honey-based syrup, and with a honey-based syrup, you take your tea and you add about 1/3 of the volume in honey. So if I have, 4 cups of finished tea, I'd add 1/3 of that as honey, right? So here I'm going to do a 3rd type of syrup, which is the glycerin-based syrup. And the glycerin-based syrup is basically you're adding about half the volume in glycerin and then an extra 1/3 of the volume in apple cider vinegar. So it's sort of like a offshoot on an oxymol, which is traditionally honey and apple cider vinegar. But again, the purpose of the glycerin is to make it both shelf stable while being low glycemic, because honey is also high glycemic. So here's my deal. So what we have in here is 2 quarts or 2 liters roughly of finished tea. And half the volume in glycerin, well, that would be 1 quart of glycerin. It's a lot of glycerin, I know, but I'm making a large batch of syrup here. So you could always adjust the proportions to make smaller batches if you're trying this for the first time. So I'm gonna add 2 of these, which is 2 measuring cups. So 4 cups is 1 quart. I'm gonna add 4 cups of glycerin into my tea base. And then I'm gonna add 1 cup, it's actually 1/4 of the volume, 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. So that should do it. I'm gonna stir it all in and then let it all get melty together in the pot. So start with 2 cups of glycerin. Glycerin by itself is not the best solvent in the world, but what it is really good at is retaining volatile oils. And I think for an aromatic syrup like pine, it's really going to enhance the flavor. And so I kind of think of like, aromatic oils or volatile oils or essential oils. They're kind of like oils or sticky things. And I kind of think of glycerin as you can see, sticky stuff. So the sticky stuff helps to hold the sticky stuff in place. I know it's an oversimplistic way of thinking of it, but it's one way to kind of remember, oh yeah, glycerin's good for retaining volatile oils. Sometimes I'll add a little glycerin to it, a tincture formula, if I want the tincture to have more of the flavor of a delicate aromatic like lavender. Really good. Or a little bit of lemon balm, a little glycerin and a lemon balm tincture just makes it pop. Okay, so that was 2 cups of glycerin going in. I'm going to add 2 more cups so that I have my full liter of glycerin, which is half the volume of the tea. There we go. And now I am going to add 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. So that's I guess a 1/4 of the amount of glycerin, right? Yeah. Okay. There it is. And we're gonna, so I have this on a really low heat right now, so just gonna stir all of that in. I don't need to bring it to a boil or anything. I just kind of want to stir it and get it all evenly mixed into solution. And it's technically called a syrup, but it's not thick like a maple syrup. I can kind of show you my consistency now. It is a little thicker than it was. It's not like it's not like maple syrup consistency. It will, once it cools, get thicker. And I guess that's the secret. I've had many students say, I kept adding more honey to my syrup, waiting for it to get thick, and it never got thick. And truth is it won't really get thick while it's hot on the stove. So once you get your proportions right and everything's done, you take it off the stove, you let it cool, and it will thicken then. So you will get more of a thick syrupy-like consistency once it cools. So be patient for that part. So anyway, there it is. It's all stirred in, and it smells really good, and pine syrup is done. Now all I have to do is bottle it and label it. This is a large amount, so I'm gonna put it in a gallon-sized jug. I'm gonna label it and put it on my shelf, and then I can dispense pint-sized bottles to my clients, myself, my family, and my friends. And we can enjoy it all winter long. So hope you enjoyed watching, and happy syrup making.